Hi everyone. This video is going to be off the cuff. There's not going to be any editing or anything really. It's just going to be me talking from start to finish. I wanted to discuss Apex Legends, a game which just came out, if I'm not mistaken, on Monday, so it's only been out for 3 or 4 days, less than a week in any case. And evidently, in its first 3 days of release, has over 10 million active players, which is pretty crazy. As far as I understand it, the game rivals Fortnite in terms of popularity, but it's also different than Fortnite and different than Overwatch. It's a battle royale game that manages to sort of carve out its own niche experience. So it's not just a variation on either of these things. And it's not really just sort of a flash in the pan because it's something different, but it's something different that comes together in a really enjoyable way. Now, I don't have a lot of money, being that I just got out of grad school and I'm still trying to produce academic material, which is time consuming and generally doesn't pay a lot, if anything. So while I'm chasing the notoriety of becoming a published academic scholar, I don't have a lot of time to accrue funds to spend on video games. In other words, the video games that I do play, I already own, and they tend to be of a specific type. One game that I was playing recently, and have been playing since I got back in the States, was Overwatch. However, my attempts to reintegrate myself into that particular text have been hit or miss, mainly because the problems that plagued the game when I left for England continued to plague it when I got back. There's a lot of balancing issues and toxicity from the players that stops the game from being as fun as it could be. And Blizzard seems to be focused on other things besides fixing those problems. With Overwatch League and all of the money that they're pouring into that, that's money that's going into that instead of fixing things for the average player, which is me. So we might get really crazy gameplay footage when the game is being played in League, but it's not going to stop the game from sucking if you just pick it up and try and play it. Now, don't get me wrong, the game is enjoyable, but every other match that I play is essentially a roll of the dice. Will it be toxic? Will it not be toxic? Will the match be fun in a way that makes me want to keep playing it? And more often than not, I feel as though I come up short as far as the dice roll is concerned. So, when I heard about a new type of game, Battle Royale, which I don't really play, coming out, that kind of not only rivals something like Fortnite or rivals something like Overwatch, but is also just a well-made game that also happens to be free, I thought to myself, why not give it a shot? Had Overwatch had many of its problems addressed at this point, I probably wouldn't have considered it, or I would have been less driven to try a new game. And I'm glad that I did, because the game is quite fun. Now, that's not to say that it is an experience for everyone. There's a YouTuber by the name of Rag Tagg, a Scottish YouTuber who I know through his Overwatch content, who recently gave a video talking about Apex Legends and how, despite the fact that the game is a triumph of the game mode and that it offers something unique and fun compared to Fortnite or Overwatch, it's not for him. Even though the experience is Battle Royale par excellence, the very nature of that type of game mode isn't one that he enjoys. And he goes on to essentially explain that there are these long lulls where if you don't die at the start of the match, there will be a large window of time, say 20 to 25 minutes, within a match that lasts half an hour, where basically nothing is happening while you're waiting for that 5 minutes of pure excitement to occur. And when it happens, it's really awesome. But until then, he's effectively bored, and he describes it as tempo, where he wants it to be a little bit more engaging throughout the entirety of the match versus it being so lopsided. This boils down to preference. If you watch, say, Alien, you spend most of the film waiting for the alien to appear, whereas if you watch Aliens, the sequel, there's a bit more combat and interaction with the monster interspersed throughout the entirety of the film, as opposed to one or two moments where the creature sort of jumps out of the darkness and grabs its victim. They're dealing with the same material, the same situation, but the tempo is different, the speed, if you will. And this makes sense to me in that it's not his speed, literally, even though if you look at the game in terms of the overall experience, aesthetically, it has characters that work together towards a common goal while fighting an enemy using firearms and moving around a map. And it's just not his preference in terms of its tempo according to these various components coming together as an overall game experience. But that doesn't mean that it's not good. It is good according to him. And I found myself when playing the game thinking to myself, okay, there seem to be these moments where the game starts where you can race straight towards the contested areas, the gunship, or the hot LZ, where the best loot is going to be found. And basically, it's a struggle to basically enter the area or board the ship, find the guns, and try and kill the enemy before they do the same to you. And it can be kind of frantic. And you get to sort of pick and choose. If you want to basically kick things off with a bang, right out of the gate, you hit the ground running, you go straight for the guns, and you get straight to that firefight. You can, but there's a chance that you're going to be experiencing that with a bunch of other players who are trying to do the exact same thing. So your odds of survival are not necessarily better. And depending on where you land, the fight will either be over really quickly or really it will become protracted. So while I do argue that there is the potential to have long matches that drag on for half an hour where not a lot actually occurs, depending on where you land, the matches can be over much quicker, or you can get into the thick of things right away. So if you want to start things off with a really rousing sort of introduction, you can do that. Inevitably, there is going to be a lull in activity, but the way that the game works is actually quite clever because it forces people to get closer and closer together using the ring system until inevitably there is going to be another fight. But you can structure that according to where you land. And if you land in one area versus the other, and these are designated on the map, you can have that fight at the start to kind of grab you. And then there's going to be a lull in the middle that is sort of peppered with smaller exchanges with a final confrontation at the end where everyone who has survived up to this point is armed to the teeth, inevitably making that final battle that much more impactful. And it's building up to it. It's sort of a rising action as defined by the game space itself. And I think that that's really cool. So the things that Rag Tagg doesn't enjoy about Apex Legends in terms of tempo are things that the player can control during the landing sequence. So I don't entirely agree with him there. The potential is there for the tempo to be of a particular type that might not be of one's preference. But you can control the tempo of the fight at the start of the match by landing. Now, you're not always in control, though, because you're not always the jump master. And I think that is something that you have to deal with. You're not always going to be the one determining how the fight goes. But you still have more control than, say, a game like Overwatch, where all of your autonomy is tied up in a team experience where more often than not, the matches in that game sort of veer away from actual coordinated team play. And in Apex Legends, if you have control as the jump master, you're automatically kind of determining how things are going to play out. That doesn't mean, though, that your teammates can't tell you to go to a particular area, but in my experience thus far, it's hard in the game to really troll because there's no friendly fire. If there were friendly fire, it would be really easy, and you'd have teammates shooting each other either by accident or on purpose. But more often than not, it's in your best interest as a player to work together with your teammates, and there's less of you, which means that your lives are more valuable, because if one of you goes down, you lose that percentage of your group's combat efficacy. So if you're in control, people can sort of steer you along or say, hey, maybe we should go here, maybe we should go there. But ultimately, the person who's guiding it is going to basically say, okay, we're going here. You can, however, veer off from them and land wherever you want. You don't have to follow them, but it's in your best interest as a group to stay together, which means that the person who is in control can listen to other people, but they're the ones who are calling the shots, and if they decide to go somewhere, the others are more than likely going to follow, because if they don't, their odds of survival go way down. But depending on where they go, you know how the match is going to play out. So if they go to a hot LZ, it's going to be a frantic fight, and you can kind of anticipate that. So it's not completely random in terms of, okay, if they're going here, you don't know what to expect. You do know what to expect, but half of the time, that's going to be something that you enjoy. And there's variation, and that variation includes the items themselves being random, and that you have to constantly adapt and work together in a way that forces you to come together as a team, which is the exact opposite of something like Overwatch, where people are constantly fighting, and there's no autonomy or control whatsoever in this situation. And because there are less players, it makes for a more unified, cohesive experience, where there's less that can go wrong with 3 players in a system like that versus 6. You have to rely on less people. And that's good, I think. It kind of reminds me of a game like Mass Effect, where you have 3 people, one of them being you, and then 2 of your teammates. Well, imagine that if you had 6. I think it would start to get kind of chaotic and jumbled, and that's just not the case here. So, as far as I'm concerned, the game is quite good for what it is, and I find that I'm not really pigeonholed into a particular experience because, one, depending on which hero or legend you choose, the experience is quite a bit different. So if you pick the medic versus the shield guy versus the soldier, you have all of these archetypical character types or action figures, if you will, that you can sort of control within the setting. They play very different individually, but they also synergize differently. So if you have the medic and the scout or the raven guy and someone else, they're going to play together differently than if you had a different combination of characters, or even if you just swapped one of them out. So the potentials for you to operate together as a team are affected throughout the game. At the beginning, certain abilities might be more useful, whereas at the end game, having something like an airstrike could be potentially more useful than having an item drop. An item drop, the medic's ultimate ability, is pretty good early on, especially if you don't land in the hot LZ. If you take a more careful approach, That would be more beneficial early on. But then in the late game, if you've lived that long and you've had time to accrue a vast wealth of weapons and armor, then having a airstrike is something that you cannot find in game. So if you already have all of these items, then an item drop is useless, whereas is a special ultimate ability that you can never find in game. Like there's no part of the map that you can control that allows you to rain an airstrike on someone. It's a unique ultimate ability. That suddenly goes up in value, especially in the end game when you're going up against really powerful enemies like a sniper. An airstrike to a defending location where the sniper is holed up would be potentially more useful than if you're armed to the teeth but you don't have the right gun. So there's all kinds of variability, and it comes together in matches that are really quick. I find I can log on the game right away, and I can find a match just as quickly as I can find a match in Overwatch without all of the toxicity. And there's a certain amount of variation, but I also know what to expect. And it comes together for an experience that, for me, anyways, is paced just right. And if it isn't paced just right, if I'm not in the mood for a particular experience, I can be like, okay, I'm not going to go to the hot LC. I want to try a different character. So I might pick the medic and try and survive long enough out of enemy fire to get an item drop. And then I'll be able to sort of accrue my arsenal that way, as opposed to having to take a risk at the start and risk having the match end right away. So there's just so much variation. And it doesn't feel like a sandbox in the sense of, well, you can do whatever you want because you're playing according to various rules, like the ring system. You have to be aware of your position, and when the ring contracts, you have to make sure to be on the right side of it, otherwise you'll take damage. One time in particular, I was in a firefight and I got downed, and my teammate was getting me up, but not before they finished off the enemy team, and there was smoke and fire and grenades flying, and it was really exciting. Well, then, as he was trying to get me up off the ground, I found myself on the wrong side of the ring. The ring contracted, and we were taking damage because we were outside of the safety zone. And you have to chase it as it's contracting to try and get on the safe side. And I wasn't able to, and I had just been revived, and there was all this loot on the ground that I had to leave behind, and I thought, oh man, I don't have any med kits, I'm gonna die, and I'm running along and my health bar is depleting as I'm trying to get to the safety zone, and I'm like, okay, there's no way I'm gonna make it. But because I was the medic, I was able to use my special ability, the drone, to heal myself. And basically the healing that the drone put out was greater than the damage that I incurred by being on the wrong side of the barrier. And I was able to get my health to full or high enough that I could run and make it to the other side of the perimeter. And all of that equipment that we had to leave behind from the enemies that we had killed, I was able to supplement by using my ultimate ability, the supply drop. So it was a really unique kind of situation where all of these circumstances are working together in a way that really isn't a sandbox, because a sandbox would just put you there and you could do whatever the hell you wanted. Here, you're responding to all of these different rules in a way that forces one, again, towards a conclusion. There's a narrative to the action that you have some control in from the beginning and the end, and you can make informed decisions based on which character you select at the start. And there's further complexity as well if someone else picks a character before you do, because there's three players to a squad. You don't always get to pick first. So there's first, second, and third. So if you get to go first, you can have further influence over the narrative by picking a particular character. And if you pick a particular character, someone else might see that and recognize, okay, this particular legend synergizes with this one. And they'll pick that. And then someone else might say, okay, well, those two together work well. Here's something that can complement them. So you're having further influence over what your teammates pick, potentially by going first. And then, based on that, you might decide, okay, based on our squad composition, we don't necessarily want to go to the hot LZ first. We don't want to try and land on the gunship. We're going to go here. And then based on that, and all of the different rules of the game, the experience is going to play out in a way that's actually quite structured, even if it doesn't seem like it is. And it's going to progress in a way that you can kind of anticipate. And while at the same time having a certain amount of variability that keeps the experience fresh, but not vacuous, not sandboxy, because if it's sandboxing, you just put people in a sandbox, well, they could just stand around and not do anything. They might not go towards a particular area, and the timer might run out, and it would get boring. But again, the game sort of forces people to congregate and fight to the death until only one squad remains, and it's really exciting. But it's also there's a great deal of nuance and variation in terms of how one picks characters, the order that they get to do that, and then whoever is the jump master. Because if you go first, during the squad select, you might not be first, or if you are first, you might not be the jump master. So there's a certain element of unpredictability, but it doesn't interfere with the experience, because even though you don't always have total say in things, it allows the experience to kind of unfold in a way where you kind of have to work together. So it's not just total chaos. And that's awesome. Whereas a game like Overwatch, it might seem more structured, but the gameplay is actually a lot more chaotic in terms of players being toxic or not working together. Whereas in Apex Legends, it's actually the exact opposite. Even though it might seem like there are more dice rolls, there are more things that sort of seemingly anyways take control away from the player. You are still making your decisions together as a team in a way that feels cohesive. And I really enjoy that, and it works really well, and I want to play the game more. I suddenly do not want to play Overwatch at all. And even more impressive is the fact that this game is free. It has a similar sort of structure that Overwatch has, in that there is a loot system where you find these chests, or whatever the game equivalent of that is. And when you open them, you get common, rare, and legendary items and currency in-game that you can accrue. But you can also buy currency if you want, but it's all purely cosmetic. So this game, unlike Overwatch, is free to play, but it also delivers a much better experience, I think. Now, you don't have certain map modes because it is Battle Royale, and it is according to the rules of the game that are different from Overwatch's. But I find that even though it only has one game mode, Battle Royale, it's a lot better than Overwatch in terms of all of the game modes that it supplies. A lot of them I don't even like. The arcade modes, most of them are for the birds. And certain map modes I don't enjoy, like 2CP. I don't think most people like 2CP. It requires a lot of teamwork, but the game doesn't really encourage that. Whereas any teamwork that is required in Apex Legends, that game does supply, according to how it's structured, in a way that doesn't necessarily feel like you're being pigeonholed into a particular response. So that's good. So yeah, that's my impressions of the game. It's definitely worth playing. And even if you don't like the game, it's free. So you can download it through Origin, play the game, and if you don't like it, you can uninstall it. But it's worth a look, especially if you don't like Fortnite. If you've never played Fortnite, if you don't like Overwatch, if you've never played it, or if you're sick of it, kind of like I am, this is something that feels new or different. It's a satisfying alternative to this, and it's well worth a look. In any case, guys, if you liked the video, leave a like or a comment in the comments section below. Subscribe to my channel and hit the bell if you want to be notified when I release new videos. I do plan on doing a video on alien isolation. I'm just kind of waiting for there to be a little bit more news. Right now I feel like there's not really enough to talk about to merit an entire video, though I might record a video in the future talking about what there is if there isn't any more news that comes apart from the fact that we're getting a mobile game, for instance. Until then, stay tuned for more content and take care.